Hello, this is Jillian Luetje, and I am an honors student for FASH 455. I'm going to speak about the future of made in the USA textiles and apparel. During this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the current state of the U.S. textile and apparel industry, how trade deals stimulate the U.S. textile and apparel industry, the future of textile and apparel manufacturing in the United States, and some conclusions I have drawn from this information. The U.S. textile and apparel industry has been on the decline for a very long time, but as you can see from the data here, it has been very stable for the past few years. U.S. textiles are more prosperous than U.S. made apparel, but both of them are steadily maintaining their place in the industry. The current U.S. textile industry has very few textile companies, but they've remained open and strong in the United States. They are seen as extremely successful because they have stayed open through the recession and to this day. The demand has leveled off, but textile companies in the United States are doing very well and strengthened supply chains. Many small textile mills have combined, which create larger and stronger mills with a higher capacity. The U.S. textile companies have built factories in Asia. Why? They want access to the Asian market. These companies do not intend to ship the textiles back to the United States. I found this very interesting because I thought U.S. textile companies wanted to keep production all in the United States and increase production in the United States. But they are also interested in globalization. They realize that by producing their products in Asia, they can save transportation costs and then give their products to the Asian market. So now I'm going to talk about the Western Hemisphere free trade agreements and made in the USA. A few trade statistics I found interesting were that less than 20% of imports into the United States come from the Western Hemisphere, but the US exports 60% of all its textiles to the Western Hemisphere. So this can conclude it is very important for the textile industry to protect the Western Hemisphere supply chain. It keeps our textile mills open. If the Western Hemisphere supply chain was not strong and we did not have the free trade agreements, 60% of U.S. textiles would not be needed anymore, which would put a lot of the U.S. textile business out of business. NAFTA is a very important free trade agreement for the U.S. textile and apparel industry, and most of this is because of Mexico. 86% of U.S. apparel imports from Mexico come through NAFTA, and Made in Mexico apparel mostly contains textiles made in the United States. This is because Mexico must have textiles made in the region of NAFTA to get duty-free access to the United States. So, they get most of their textiles from the United States textile industry. This is very important because it keeps the Western Hemisphere supply chain going and keeps the U.S. textile industry thriving. CAFTA is another really important free trade agreement for the U.S. textile and apparel industry. 77% of U.S. apparel imports from the CAFTA region come through the agreement. Also, U.S. apparel imports from the CAFTA countries also mostly use U.S.-made textiles. This is like what I just said about NAFTA and how it keeps the Western Hemisphere supply chain going. U.S.-made textiles are mostly only shipped to the Western Hemisphere, so without these free trade agreements, the U.S. textile industry would crumble. However, the CAFTA apparel exports face direct competition from China in the U.S. apparel import market. When CAFTA was first put into action, it was not as successful as they thought it would be. This was because at the same exact time, the quotas from China were dropped, so more people could import even cheaper apparel from China. Next, I'm going to talk about the future of textile and apparel manufacturing in the USA. The future of the U.S. textile industry does not see any drastic changes coming in the future. Right now, the U.S. is finding its niche in the value-added and industrial products, such as technical, knit, fire-resistant workwear, etc. Another thing that could be very big in the United States is smart textiles, which sportswear companies are finding very common now. The U.S. will also remain stable in the textile industry because of the advantage of lower energy costs. Many people think that the US is not a sourcing destination for textiles because of high labor costs, but there are many other factors at play, such as energy costs and transportation costs. The future of apparel manufacturing in the United States also has a high-end niche. The high-end products are not as popular as they used to be, so the overall market for the United States produced products is continuing to decline. An example of this is tailored suits. The United States could have a giant market for tailored suits since it is a high-end product and very specialized. But with casual workwear being very important, tailored suits are not as demanded as they used to be. A few conclusions I have drawn from my research and interview is that the textile and apparel manufacturing in the United States is not totally gone. Textiles are being created here every day and mostly shipped to the Western Hemisphere. Also, there is apparel manufacturing in the United States for a high-end market. Also, the U.S. textile industry in particular relies on the Western Hemisphere supply chain and related free trade agreements. As I said earlier, without NAFTA and CAFTA, many U.S. textile industry businesses would fail because many of their exports go to the Western Hemisphere. Lastly, Made in the USA apparel is not going to increase anytime soon. We just don't have the amount of capital and investment in this country to bring back this type of manufacturing. But we are going to continue to be steadily creating high-end products for apparel. These are my references from my research. Also, a special thanks to Richard Stetson for letting me interview him and ask him a bunch of questions about my interests. Thank you for listening to this presentation.